Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Hercule Poirot and Who Left, Who Died, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Vanishing Without a Trace. The room was silent, eerily so save for the faint ticking of the grand clock on the mantelpiece. Poirot stood by the window, his sharp gaze fixed on the rain that lashed against the panes, as if the storm itself sought to drive the world into madness. Yet it was not the storm that unsettled him. It was the absence. A man had vanished, disappeared into thin air, without a single trace. How could it be? The voice of Inspector Japp broke through the tension, his hands twitching in frustration as he looked over the papers, the only evidence they had of the missing man's existence. 1 minute, he was here, and the next, nothing. No struggle, no sign of a struggle. It's as if he never was. Poirot turned slowly, his elegant figure cutting through the gloom like a knife through fog. Ah, mon ami, do not jump to conclusions so hastily. The absence, it is indeed disturbing, but remember this, no crime is ever without a trace, no matter how subtle. Japp's eyes narrowed, his skepticism barely hidden. You really think there's something more to this? Poirot smiled, but it was not the smile of a man pleased with himself. It was the quiet assurance of a mind already working, already cutting through the layers of confusion like a surgeon with a scalpel. Indeed I do, Poirot replied, his voice soft but firm. The disappearance of Monsieur Ashford, this is no simple matter of misfortune. No, no, this is something far more intricate. A vanishing without a trace is always the work of a careful hand, a deliberate mind. And we must be very careful, Japp, for in the absence lies the answer. As Poirot spoke, his mind began to dance with possibilities. He could already feel the tension in the room, the atmosphere thick with unspoken fears. But Poirot knew better than to be swayed by emotion. He would not be fooled by the chaos. No, it was the calm before the storm that held the key. He stepped forward, his footsteps measured and precise, as always. The room seemed to shrink around him, the walls closing in, as though they too were aware of the gravity of the situation. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the room, his gaze taking in every detail, every corner where secrets might hide. The door creaked open, and in walked a woman, tall, poised, and wearing the expression of one who had been accustomed to getting her way. Lady Eleanor Ashford, the wife of the missing man. She moved gracefully, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of anxiety, a tremor of fear, that betrayed the calm facade she so carefully constructed. "I am so glad you've arrived, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice like silk, but her words heavy with something darker. "I do not know where to turn. My husband is gone, and I fear for him." Poirot studied her with his piercing gaze, noting the slight quiver of her hands as she clasped them together, the delicate tremble of her lip. She was not crying, no, her composure was too polished for that. But Poirot was trained to see the signs, the subtle ones that spoke volumes. "Madame Ashford," Poirot said softly, "it is a tragedy indeed, but fear not. The truth It shall come to light. You have nothing to fear from me, but perhaps you will tell me something of Monsieur Ashford, his character, his habits, his enemies, if any." Lady Ashford hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor for a moment before meeting his gaze again. "He was a businessman," she said, the words measured. "A man of ambition, yes. But he had no enemies, monsieur, no one who would wish him harm." "A businessman," Poirot repeated thoughtfully. "Ambition, yes. And yet, even the most successful of men have enemies, do they not? Tell me, Madame Ashford, how well did you truly know your husband?" Her eyes widened for a moment, her lips parting as though to say something, but she closed them again. Poirot's brow furrowed as he sensed something amiss. She was hiding something, of that he was certain. But what? What was she not telling him? The clock on the mantelpiece ticked louder, as though urging Poirot on. He had seen enough. The clues, the words, the way she spoke, everything pointed to one thing. Something was terribly wrong. But what? I beg your pardon, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Ashford said, her voice quivering now. "But I must ask you, will you find my husband? Will you bring him home?" Poirot stood still for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "I shall, Madame Ashford. I shall find him. But first, I must ask one more question. A simple question. A question that may seem trivial, but it is not." He paused, letting the tension in the room grow heavier. "Where did you last see your husband?" Lady Ashford's eyes flickered. The faintest of tremors passed through her, but she recovered quickly, her composure back in place. "In his study, Monsieur Poirot. He was there, as usual, at his desk, when I last saw him. It was only when I returned a few minutes later that he was gone." Poirot turned away, his gaze sweeping across the room once more. His mind was already turning, the pieces falling into place. He could feel the pull of the puzzle. The mystery was only just beginning, but it was already clear to him. There was something more to this disappearance than met the eye. Poirot turned back to Lady Ashford, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Madame. You have been most helpful. I shall need to speak with your staff, of course. But first, there is one more thing I must ask you. One last thing. You say your husband was in his study. Was he alone?" For a moment, there was silence. And then, Lady Ashford's voice broke the stillness. He was not alone. He had a visitor. A man. I do not know who he was. I did not see him clearly, but there was someone with him. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his pulse quickening. This was it. The key. A visitor. Someone with him. That was the answer he had been waiting for. "Tell me, Madame Ashford," Poirot said, his voice cold and calculated. "What did this visitor look like?" Lady Ashford hesitated again, her eyes shifting nervously. She opened her mouth to speak, but then, as if she had decided against it, she closed it once more. Poirot did not push her further. Not yet. The game had just begun. But he had a sense, a deep, gut-wrenching feeling that something far darker was at play here than even he had anticipated. "I shall return shortly," Poirot said, his voice calm, his mind already at work. "And when I do, Madame Ashford, I will have the answers you seek. But remember this, no disappearance is without its trace, and all the pieces will fall into place. That, I promise you." As Poirot turned to leave, the rain outside grew heavier, the thunder crashing in the distance, as though the very heavens themselves were holding their breath. And in that moment, Poirot knew. The game was afoot, and nothing would stop him from uncovering the truth. Chapter 2. A Death No One Expected. The thunder rumbled outside, a rolling malevolent growl from the heavens, as if nature itself had become an unwilling participant in the tragedy unfolding. Poirot stood at the threshold of the room, eyes narrowed, taking in the scene with his usual precise scrutiny. The death of Monsieur Ashford had already stirred a storm of whispers, but this was something entirely different. The body of Lord Carrington lay slumped in his chair, his eyes wide, open, as if caught in the final moment of disbelief. Inspector Japp stood at the doorway, his face ashen, his lips drawn tight in a grim line. "I can't make sense of it, Poirot," he muttered, his voice a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "One minute, he's here, in the middle of the conversation, and the next, he's dead. No warning, no struggle, nothing." Poirot stepped forward, his polished shoes making no sound against the cold marble floor. He took in the scene with a dispassionate air, walking around the body, noting every detail, every imperfection. Lord Carrington's hands were still clenched in fists, as though he had been in the midst of a heated argument, or perhaps a moment of terror. Poirot could not yet say which. "Ah, but this is the nature of death, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low, measured. "It arrives when least expected, often in the most shocking manner, and yet the manner of its arrival is never without meaning." His eyes flicked to the open window. The curtains were disturbed, as if a gust of wind had swept through. But no, this was no ordinary breeze. There was something amiss about the way they swayed. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "This, Inspector Japp, is not a natural death." Japp looked at him, bewildered. "What do you mean?" "It was a heart attack, surely, or something like it. No signs of violence, no weapon, no poison." No," Poirot interrupted gently, his fingers stroking his immaculate mustache. "The absence of signs is precisely what makes this death so unexpected. But it is not the absence of violence that holds the clue. It is the presence of something hidden, perhaps something even more dangerous than a knife or a poison." Japp frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Poirot's gaze swept the room again, his mind ticking away as rapidly as the clock on the wall. The ticking grew louder in the silence, echoing in the back of his mind like a drumbeat. "There are three things that do not lie, mon ami: the truth of human nature, the nature of the room, and the subtle, invisible threads between them." He stopped and turned slowly toward the table near the body. A glass of water was still standing there, untouched, but it was not the water that drew Poirot's attention. It was the way the glass sat, precisely placed, as if waiting for its next move. "Come, Japp," Poirot said, gesturing with his gloved hand. "Let us look closer at the details. We will begin with what is most obvious, but do not mistake the obvious for the whole picture." The inspector moved reluctantly closer. "What do you mean by that?" Poirot stepped forward, a faint smile curling at the corner of his lips. "You see, my friend, it is not the body of Lord Carrington that is of most interest to me at the moment. It is this glass, the glass that rests upon this table, unspoiled, as though waiting for an actor to take his cue." Japp scratched his head. "I don't follow." "Let us investigate," Poirot replied, and with the delicate movements of a skilled surgeon, he picked up the glass and studied it closely. "Do you see, mon ami? The glass is filled to the brim, but the liquid does not reach the edge. It is as though someone has been careful, too careful, in handling it. This is not a spill, nor an accident." Poirot turned the glass over revealing a small indentation on the rim. A fingerprint. But not just any fingerprint. No, this one is fresh, almost as if it were placed here deliberately, with intent. A chill passed through the room. Japp's eyes widened. You think it was tampered with? Poirot gave a small, knowing nod. Indeed, this glass, it was part of the game, but not for Lord Carrington's benefit. Someone wanted him dead, but not in a way anyone could immediately understand. They gave him the gift of death in a form no one would expect. A death of silence, hidden in plain sight. But why? Japp's voice was thick with disbelief. Who would kill him? And why like this? Poirot's gaze hardened. A very good question, mon ami, and it is one that we must answer. But remember this, when death strikes, it strikes for a reason, no matter how obscure, and those who are responsible will always leave behind a trail of suspicion, of motives, and of lies. The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over them. Poirot's mind was already racing, dissecting the scene, weaving through the clues. The room had begun to feel suffocating, the very walls pressing in, as though they were closing in on a secret too dangerous to reveal. The guests, Poirot said suddenly, as if an idea had sparked in his mind. Who were they? Who was here when Lord Carrington died? Japp glanced at the door. A small gathering, just a few of his closest associates, but no one who stands out as a suspect. Ah, but that is where you are mistaken, Inspector, Poirot replied, his voice almost a whisper. It is never the ones who stand out who are guilty. It is always the ones who hide behind the shadows, behind the mask of innocence, who carry the heaviest burdens of guilt. Poirot's mind turned to the three guests. Lady Ashford, her beauty masking a cold, calculating nature, the charming but elusive Geoffrey West, a man of dubious means, and the quiet, unassuming Dr. Hargrove, whose presence always seemed to linger in the background. All three had the perfect motives, but only one could be guilty. The storm outside began to howl, the winds lashing against the windows like the cries of 1,000 voices. In that moment, Poirot felt the tension building to a breaking point. One of them had killed Lord Carrington. But which one? The answers, Poirot knew, would come soon, very soon. But not yet. The puzzle pieces had only begun to fall into place. There was much more to uncover, much more to learn, and Poirot was already steps ahead of them all. As the two men moved deeper into the investigation, Poirot's thoughts lingered on one final, disturbing possibility. What if this death, this seemingly random tragedy, was not an isolated event? What if there was a much larger game at play, one that only he could see? The thought gnawed at him as the darkness pressed in, the wind carrying with it the promise of more lies, more twists. But Poirot was ready. The game was afoot, and he would be the one to uncover the truth. For now, though, he could only smile, a small, knowing smile, as he turned to Japp. The truth, my friend, Poirot said softly, is never as simple as it seems. But rest assured, I will find it. As the storm raged on, Poirot stepped into the darkness of the night, his mind already forming the pieces of a puzzle that would soon shatter everything they thought they knew. The death of Lord Carrington was only the beginning. Chapter 3. The Clue That Didn't Fit. The room was heavy with the scent of tobacco smoke and the faint rustle of curtains, disturbed by an unseen wind. Outside, the storm raged on, its thundering fury creating a backdrop for the unsettling quiet within. Poirot stood motionless, his hands folded behind his back, his sharp gaze fixed on the papers before him. There was something about this case that gnawed at him, something that didn't sit right. His mind was always working, always analyzing, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of unease. Then it appeared, a clue, one so simple, yet so incongruent, that it took him a moment to grasp its significance. The clue that didn't fit. "Poirot," Japp said, his voice filled with disbelief as he approached the desk. "You'll never believe this." Poirot's gaze flicked up, narrowing with intense curiosity. "What is it, mon ami?" Japp placed a small, delicate object on the desk, a gold cufflink, gleaming in the dim light of the room. "We found this on the floor of Lord Carrington's study, just outside the door. A cufflink. There was no one else in the room at the time of his death. No sign of a struggle, no reason for it to be there." Poirot's fingers hovered over the cufflink, his eyes studying it with meticulous care. It was beautiful, crafted from gold, and set with a small ruby that caught the light in a way that seemed almost intentional. Yet there was something about it that struck Poirot as wrong. "Ah," Poirot said softly, almost to himself, "a clue that does not fit." He paused, his mind working, the thoughts whirling around him like a storm. "It does not belong here, does it? This cufflink, it is out of place, a piece of a puzzle that does not belong in this particular puzzle." Japp looked at him, perplexed. "But it was found right outside the study. It has to be related." Poirot shook his head, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "It may seem so, but it is far too convenient, my friend. This is the very thing that causes the doubt, the question. For you see, Japp, a good criminal knows that the key to deception is in creating the appearance of truth. This cufflink is but a distraction, a clever misdirection." Japp's brows furrowed in confusion. "Misdirection? But why?" "Because, my dear friend," Poirot interjected with a quiet certainty, "this cufflink does not belong to Lord Carrington. No, no. It is not his. The question, Japp, is not how it ended up in his study. The question is, who does it belong to?" There was a moment of silence as Japp took a step back, absorbing the weight of Poirot's words. "You think someone planted it?" "Indeed," Poirot replied, his voice calm but filled with a penetrating sharpness. "The criminal sought to create a false trail, to mislead us into thinking it belonged to Lord Carrington. But no, Japp, it is far more clever than that. It is designed to mislead, to make us look in the wrong direction." Japp was about to respond when a knock echoed at the door, cutting through the tension. Poirot glanced at Japp before gesturing for the person to enter. It was Lady Ashford, her expression pale and tight, her usually composed demeanor now replaced with a palpable tension. She stepped into the room with a measured elegance, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt, or perhaps fear, that Poirot did not miss. "Excuse me, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady, but with a hint of something else lurking beneath. "I have come to speak with you about my husband's disappearance and the tragic death of Lord Carrington." Poirot stood straight, his posture impeccable. "Madame Ashford," he said with a slight bow, "it is a pleasure to see you again. Please sit. We have much to discuss." Lady Ashford took a seat across from Poirot, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked at Japp briefly, then turned her gaze back to Poirot, her eyes sharp but strained. "I know you are investigating my husband's disappearance, and I fear I may have information that could help, but I must ask for your discretion. There are things that I have not told you, things I was afraid to say before. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but his expression remained calm, his voice soft yet commanding. You have come to the right man, madame. I assure you, I do not judge, but I do expect honesty, for without it, we are all lost. Lady Ashford hesitated for a moment before speaking. The night before Lord Carrington's death, I overheard a conversation between Lord Carrington and my husband. It was heated. I could not hear all the details, but it was clear that there was a disagreement. Something about money, about a deal gone wrong. I believe my husband may have had a hand in Lord Carrington's death, but I cannot prove it. I fear I am only complicating matters. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes locked onto hers. Ah, madame, it is not complicating matters. It is shedding light on them. You have done the right thing by speaking up. But now, you must tell me, did you hear anything else? Anything that could shed light on this argument between Lord Carrington and your husband? Lady Ashford shook her head, her eyes cast downward. No, I wish I had, but there was nothing more, only that my husband was furious, and Lord Carrington seemed desperate. Poirot nodded, taking in her words carefully. Very well. Thank you for your honesty, Madame Ashford. But now, I must ask you a question, one that will seem rather direct, perhaps, but it is crucial to our investigation. He paused, watching her closely. Have you any knowledge of a certain gold cufflink that was found in Lord Carrington's study? A cufflink that does not belong there, Madame. Lady Ashford's eyes widened for just a fraction of a second, and Poirot noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor. A cufflink, she repeated, her voice betraying no hint of surprise. I do not know what you mean. Poirot tilted his head, his moustache twitching as he considered her response. Ah, but you do know, madame. You see, the cufflink was found right outside the door of the study, and it does not belong to Lord Carrington. It is not his, and I believe it belongs to someone close to him, someone who had access to the room, someone like your husband. Lady Ashford's face drained of colour. She swallowed hard, but she held her composure, as if desperately trying to regain control over her emotions. I don't know anything about it, she stammered, her voice faltering. Poirot smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. Ah, madame, the truth is always elusive when one has something to hide. But rest assured, I will find it. Lady Ashford stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a loud noise that echoed through the room. I must go, she said, quickly, her voice trembling. Please do not accuse my husband without evidence. I am not lying. You must believe me. As she turned to leave, Poirot's sharp eyes followed her, his mind already piecing together the puzzle. This was only the beginning, but already things were becoming clearer. The cufflink, the argument, Lady Ashford's reaction, it all pointed in one direction, but Poirot knew better than to draw conclusions too quickly. The game was afoot, and every piece, every clue, no matter how small, was part of the grand design. Poirot would follow it to its end, and he would uncover the truth. But first, there was one more question that needed answering. Who else had been in the study that night? And why had they left behind a clue so carefully placed, yet so out of place? As the door closed behind Lady Ashford, Poirot turned to Japp, his voice calm, but filled with a quiet intensity. The truth, my friend, is a very patient thing. It will not reveal itself all at once, but it will reveal itself in time. Japp looked at Poirot, his confusion still evident. "And you think this cufflink is the key?" Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Not the key, Jap. The door. And once it is opened, we will see everything." And with that, the investigation took another turn, into the shadows where secrets were kept, and where the truth, no matter how painful, awaited. Chapter 4. A hidden letter. A deadly secret. The storm was relentless, a fury of wind and rain that seemed intent on shaking the house to its very foundations. The walls creaked and groaned under the pressure of the tempest outside, but inside, the room was still, eerily still. Poirot stood by the desk, his hands folded behind his back, his eyes scanning the papers that lay before him. The sound of the clock's steady ticking was the only thing that cut through the silence. But Poirot's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, the puzzle pieces falling into place with the precision of a master at work. Then it happened. A faint rustle from behind the closed door, the sound of footsteps. Poirot's sharp eyes flicked to the door as it opened, revealing Lady Ashford. Her face was pale, her expression strained, and there was something in her eyes, something that spoke of fear and hesitation. "Mon Dieu," Poirot muttered under his breath. "This is no ordinary visit." Lady Ashford stepped into the room, her gaze darting nervously around as though searching for an escape. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice shaky but firm, "there is something I must show you, something I have been keeping hidden, something that could change everything." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. "Ah, Madame Ashford, you have come at last. Please sit. What is it that you wish to reveal? A confession, perhaps?" His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension that could not be ignored. Lady Ashford's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly, her hands trembling as she reached into the folds of her gown. From within, she pulled out a crumpled, yellowed envelope, old, frayed at the edges, as though it had been hidden away for far too long. She held it out to Poirot with a hesitant hand, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This letter," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It was addressed to Lord Carrington. I found it among his personal effects, but it was not meant for anyone to see. He had hidden it, locked away in his study. I did not know if I should reveal it, but now I see no other way." Poirot reached out and took the letter from her, his fingers brushing against hers for the briefest of moments. There was something in the touch, something cold, something final. He glanced at Lady Ashford, his expression unreadable. "And you have not read it, Madame?" "I did not," she replied quickly. "I could not bring myself to, but I think you must, Monsieur Poirot, for I fear it contains the answer to his death." Poirot gave a small nod, his eyes narrowing in thought. He carefully opened the envelope, his movements slow and deliberate, as though the very act of breaking the seal was a solemn event. The paper inside was fragile, yellowed with age, but the handwriting was clear. Poirot began to read, his eyes flicking back and forth, absorbing the words, every phrase, every syllable. As he read, a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Ah, Madame," Poirot said, his voice soft, but filled with a quiet certainty. "It is as I suspected." Lady Ashford's breath hitched. "What does it say? What does the letter reveal?" Poirot turned the letter over slowly, his gaze fixed on the final lines. "It reveals more than just a secret, Madame. It reveals a motive, a betrayal, a deadly secret that no one could have anticipated." Lady Ashford's face drained of colour, her hands trembling as she reached out for the letter, but Poirot held it out of her reach. It seems that Lord Carrington was not the man everyone thought him to be. His dealings were less than honourable, and the one who stood to benefit most from his death, Madame, is none other than your husband. Lady Ashford recoiled, her expression one of disbelief and horror. My husband? That cannot be. You are mistaken. Poirot raised a hand, silencing her with a calm yet forceful gesture. No, Madame, I am not mistaken. You see, the letter was a final warning. It was written by Lord Carrington himself. A confession of sorts. He had discovered something about your husband's business dealings, something unsavory, something that could ruin him. And in his desperation, Lord Carrington had planned to confront him, to expose him. Lady Ashford shook her head, a frantic look in her eyes. No, this cannot be true. My husband would never— Ah, but Madame, human nature— It is always the same, Poirot interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. The lengths to which one will go to protect oneself, or to take what one believes is owed to them. It is all too clear now. The letter was not just a warning. It was the catalyst, the reason for Lord Carrington's death. Lady Ashford's eyes darted nervously to the door, as though she feared someone might overhear. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. But what does this mean? What should I do? What do you want from me? Poirot studied her carefully, his eyes never leaving her face. What I want, Madame, is the truth. You knew of this letter, and you knew of your husband's involvement, but you did not come to me earlier. Why? Lady Ashford opened her mouth, but no words came out. She closed it again, her eyes shifting away from Poirot's penetrating gaze. I was afraid. I thought I could handle it myself. I thought I could keep it hidden. But now it is too late. Poirot nodded slowly, his mind already racing with the implications of this revelation. The game had changed, the pieces had shifted, but one question still remained. If Lady Ashford's husband had killed Lord Carrington, then why was he still missing? Why had he not returned? Madame Ashford, Poirot said, his voice calm and measured, there is still much we do not know, but rest assured, I will uncover the truth. This letter, it is but one piece of the puzzle, and I will not rest until I have placed every piece in its rightful place. Lady Ashford stood, her expression one of complete confusion and fear. But what about my husband? What do you think happened to him? Poirot's eyes were cold, calculating. Your husband, Madame, has vanished. But there are no accidents in this world. Everything happens for a reason, and your husband's disappearance is part of a much larger plan, one that is still unfolding before us. As Poirot spoke, he could almost feel the weight of the letter in his hands, the truth contained within it pressing against him like a heavy burden. This was no ordinary crime. This was something far more insidious, a deadly secret that had remained hidden for far too long, and now it was threatening to come to light. Poirot turned his gaze back to Lady Ashford, his eyes filled with quiet determination. We will find your husband, Madame, and we will uncover the truth of Lord Carrington's death. But no, nothing is as it seems. And those who believe they are safe, those who believe they have escaped justice, may soon find themselves facing a reckoning far worse than they could have imagined. Lady Ashford looked at him, her face a mask of fear and uncertainty. What do you mean? Poirot's gaze hardened as he stepped closer, his voice low but filled with the weight of impending doom. I mean, Madame, that secrets have a way of coming to light, and when they do, they have a tendency to destroy everything in their path. As he spoke, Poirot's mind continued to race. The pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. There were more secrets, more lies, and more betrayals to uncover. And Poirot knew that the final revelation would not only shock them, it would change everything. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling like a creature in pain. Poirot's sharp mind took in every detail, every clue, and every shift in the room. There was no turning back now. The deadly secret had been revealed, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down. Lady Ashford turned to leave, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Poirot remained where he stood, his thoughts already on the next step, already knowing that the game was far from over. The clock ticked on, and in that ticking, Poirot could hear the rhythm of justice closing in on its prey. The truth would come. And, when it did, it would be devastating. The truth, Poirot murmured to himself, always has a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it is buried. And with that, the investigation moved forward into the heart of darkness, where secrets waited to be uncovered and where betrayal lurked just beneath the surface, ready to destroy everything. Chapter 5. The Whisper of the Impossible. The wind howled outside, a deafening roar that rattled the windows of the dimly lit study. The shadows cast by the flickering candlelight danced on the walls, as though they were alive, unsettling, ever moving. Poirot stood at the window, his back straight, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond. It was in moments like these that he found clarity. The world outside, with its storm and chaos, reflected the confusion within. But not for him. He had learned long ago to trust his senses, his mind always sharp and clear, even in the face of the most bewildering mysteries. Then, a whisper, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, broke the silence. It was a voice, faint and distant, but unmistakable. "Impossible," it whispered. It was impossible. Poirot turned slowly, his sharp eyes narrowing. A faint smile played on his lips, but it was not one of pleasure. It was the kind of smile that came from recognizing the first real clue in a puzzle that had seemed unsolvable. "Ah," he murmured to himself. "There it is, the whisper of the impossible." He turned to face Inspector Japp, who stood across the room, clearly agitated. "What is it, Poirot? What do you hear?" Poirot's voice was calm, measured, as he replied, "It is a voice, mon ami, a voice that is telling me that something has been concealed, something is not what it seems. A whisper of the impossible, of something beyond the grasp of logic, beyond the reach of reason." Japp's eyes were wide with confusion. "But what does that mean? What impossible thing are we talking about?" Poirot stepped closer, his eyes narrowing, his mind already working. "It means we are dealing with a mystery far more complex than we anticipated. You see, Japp, every case has its limits, its boundaries. And yet sometimes the impossible reveals itself in the most unexpected of ways. A death that defies all explanation, a disappearance that cannot be explained by any rational means, but the impossible is not impossible, mon ami. It is merely unexplained." Japp frowned, his brow furrowing in frustration. "This is all very cryptic, Poirot. What exactly are you getting at?" Poirot turned to him, his eyes glinting with the sharpness of a mind that never ceased to analyze, never ceased to dissect. "What I am getting at, Japp, is that our investigation has uncovered something far more dangerous than we thought. A conspiracy, perhaps, a deception. But more than that, it speaks of a truth so buried, so carefully concealed, that only someone truly observant could uncover it. Japp took a deep breath, his patience thinning. I don't understand. What's the next step? Who do we go after next? Poirot's gaze turned toward the desk, where a pile of documents lay untouched, each one a clue, a piece of the puzzle. His fingers hovered over the papers, but his mind was elsewhere. We do not go after anyone just yet, Japp, Poirot said, slowly, his voice soft, almost reflective. We must first understand the impossible. We must unravel the truth, not by chasing shadows, but by observing them closely. There are 3 people who stand at the heart of this mystery. 3 suspects, each with their own secrets, each with their own motivations. Lady Ashford, Geoffrey West, and Dr. Hargrove. They all play a part. But the question is, who is telling the truth? Who is hiding the most dangerous secret? Japp's eyes flickered as Poirot continued. Lady Ashford, the grieving wife, who seeks to protect her husband at all costs. Geoffrey West, the charming but elusive business partner, whose ties to Carrington seem more than coincidental. And Dr. Hargrove, the quiet observer, who seems to know more than he lets on. Poirot paused, his gaze drifting over to the window once more. The storm outside had not let up. It seemed to intensify, as if echoing the growing tension within the room. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls, making the study feel smaller, more enclosed, as though the walls themselves were closing in. And yet, Poirot continued, his voice growing quieter, one of them is lying. One of them is hiding something. And it is this secret that will lead us to the truth. We are not just looking for a murderer, mon ami. No, we are looking for a man or a woman who has the power to make the impossible seem real. Japp shook his head in disbelief. But how do you even begin to unravel something like that? What could possibly make something so impossible? Poirot turned back to him, his expression calm but firm. Ah, Japp, it is in the small details, the things that others overlook, the quiet whispers that no one else hears. When the impossible happens, it is never without warning. It is simply a matter of recognizing the signs. Poirot's sharp gaze landed on the letter, still lying on the desk. The letter that Lady Ashford had given him earlier. He picked it up with great care, studying it once more. His mind raced, analyzing every word, every curve of the handwriting. Something about it felt off. A hidden message, a clue, left in plain sight, but concealed within layers of deception. Japp, Poirot said, his voice now intense. There is something about this letter. Something that I missed earlier. Look at the writing, look at the ink. The handwriting is inconsistent. The person who wrote this wanted to conceal their identity. But why? Japp leaned over, his eyes scanning the letter. I don't see it, Poirot. It looks like any other letter. Poirot smiled, the hint of triumph in his eyes. That is because you are not looking carefully enough, Japp. You must understand. Nothing is ever as it seems. The ink, it is smudged in a particular way. It was not written quickly. No, it was written with care, as though the writer was trying to disguise something. Something important. Japp's brow furrowed as he examined the letter more closely. What do you mean? Smudged ink? I don't get it. Poirot leaned in, his finger gently tracing the ink marks. You see, mon ami, these smudges, they are not mistakes. They are intentional. They were meant to mislead. The writer was trying to hide something in plain sight. And that, my friend, is what makes this letter so dangerous. It is not just a letter. It is a message, a whisper, a clue to something far more sinister. Jappy straightened, his eyes widening as the realization began to dawn. You think someone tampered with this letter? Poirot nodded slowly. Indeed. But who? Who had the opportunity? Who would benefit from making it appear as though Lord Carrington had written it? And why was it hidden in the first place? As Poirot turned to face the room once more, his mind spun with the possibilities. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still so much that did not make sense. Why had the letter been hidden? Who stood to gain from Lord Carrington's death? And what was the true nature of the impossible death that had defied all logic? Japp's voice cut through his thoughts. What do we do now, Poirot? Poirot looked at him, his eyes gleaming with quiet confidence. We continue to observe, mon ami. We do not chase after shadows. We wait. The answer is coming. The impossible will reveal itself, and when it does, we will be ready. The storm outside raged on, but inside, the study was still. The air was thick with the tension of a mystery that was just beginning to unravel. Poirot knew that the truth was close, too close to ignore, and when it came, it would bring with it the kind of revelation that would change everything. As he turned back to the letter, Poirot's mind raced with the possibilities. The whispers of the impossible were growing louder, but they were still elusive, slipping just beyond his grasp. He would find the truth. He was certain of it. The impossible was never truly impossible. It was simply a matter of looking closer, of seeing what others had missed. And Poirot would see it all. Chapter 6. The Unseen Witness Speaks. The candle flickered, casting its long, trembling shadows against the walls of the dimly lit room. The storm outside had reached a new intensity, a violent crescendo that rattled the windows, as though the heavens themselves were warning of the chaos unfolding within. Poirot sat at the desk, his back perfectly straight, his fingers steepling in contemplation. The silence was heavy, laden with the weight of an unanswered question that had been gnawing at him for days. And then, as if on cue, the door creaked open and the unexpected entered. A man, frail and bent with age, stepped into the room. His clothes were worn, his face obscured by a tattered hat that cast a long shadow over his eyes. He moved with an uncertain gait, his steps hesitant, as if each one was a struggle. Yet there was something in his presence, a tension that Poirot recognized immediately. Poirot's sharp eyes flicked to him, his gaze calculating. "Ah, monsieur, please, come in," he said, his voice as composed as ever. "You have come to speak, I assume." The man nodded, his hands trembling as he removed the hat from his head, revealing a face lined with age and secrets. I am the witness you've been searching for," the man muttered, his voice low, barely audible over the thunder. Poirot leaned forward, his posture still elegant, but now there was an intensity in his eyes. "A witness?" He repeated the word carefully, as though savoring its weight. "And what is it you have witnessed, monsieur?" The man's eyes flickered to the door, as if checking to ensure he was not being watched. "I saw him," he said suddenly, his voice trembling. "I saw Lord Carrington's killer." The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening with the gravity of the man's words. Japp, who had been standing in the corner, stiffened. "What do you mean you saw him?" he demanded. "Who did you see? Tell us, man." Poirot raised a hand, silencing Japp with a calm gesture. Let him speak, Inspector. Please, monsieur, continue. The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room. It was late that night. I was in the alley behind the house, just minding my own business. I didn't mean to see anything, but I saw him, Lord Carrington, walking out of his study. He was different, not himself. He was pale, his hands trembling. I could see the fear in his eyes. He paused, his face contorting with emotion as though the memory was too painful to bear. I don't know why, but I followed him. He went to the garden, and I saw him with another man, a tall figure, cloaked in shadows. They spoke in low voices, too quietly for me to hear, but I could see the way the other man, he was threatening him. Poirot's gaze never left the witness. And this figure, monsieur, Poirot asked softly, what did he look like? Can you describe him? The man hesitated, his brow furrowing as he tried to recall. I don't know. He was tall, wearing a coat, a dark one. His face was hidden in the shadows, and his voice was rough, like someone trying to disguise themselves. Poirot's mind raced, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, but there was something about this man's story that didn't add up. And what happened next, monsieur? The man's face twisted in anguish. I saw the figure raise his hand, and then his voice faltered. I couldn't see what happened. Lord Carrington collapsed. He fell to the ground, and the man disappeared into the night. Poirot remained silent for a moment, considering the man's words, allowing the weight of them to settle in the room. He had known that there was more to this story, more than anyone had been willing to admit. But this was a twist he had not expected. A witness who had seen the killer, but whose testimony was shrouded in mystery. Ah, but you say you saw the killer, Poirot said, his voice low. But you do not know who he is. You cannot even describe his face. How can you be certain of what you saw? The man's eyes flickered, guilt passing over his features like a shadow. I cannot be sure. I only know what I saw, but I'm telling you the truth. I am not lying. Poirot studied him carefully, his gaze unflinching. You are not lying, monsieur, he said softly. But there is more, is there not? You are hiding something. The man flinched, his face paling. He opened, his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Poirot's sharp eyes never wavered, locking onto the man's every movement, every shift in his posture. He could see it now, the subtle signs of fear, of guilt, of a man who had something to hide. You know more than you're telling, Poirot continued. There is a truth here that you are keeping from us, something important. The man trembled, his hands shaking as he reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small, crumpled piece of paper. This, he whispered, his voice barely audible. This is all I have. It was in Lord Carrington's hand when I found him. It was the last thing he held before he died. Poirot took the paper carefully, his fingers brushing against the fragile edges. He unfolded it slowly, revealing a series of hastily scrawled words. The ink was smeared, as though it had been written in haste, but the message was clear enough. Help me, it said. I know who is behind it all. It's him, Geoffrey West. Japp's face twisted in confusion. Geoffrey West? But Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Ah, but the plot thickens, Japp. Geoffrey West, he is the last person anyone would suspect, yet there it is, in black and white, the name written by Lord Carrington himself. The man looked up at Poirot, his eyes wide with fear. I didn't know who he meant, but I saw West that night. He was at the estate, talking to Lord Carrington in the garden, and I swear, Poirot, he was the one who made him afraid." Poirot set the paper down, his fingers lingering on the edge. "This changes everything, monsieur," Poirot said, his voice cold. "Geoffrey West has been hiding in plain sight, his motives obscured, but now the truth is beginning to reveal itself. We must confront him." But even as Poirot spoke, he knew this was not the end. There was more to this story, more lies, more deceptions, and he would need to peel back every layer to uncover the truth. Geoffrey West was not the only suspect. There was more, far more, that was being kept in the shadows. The storm outside raged on, its fury seemingly matched by the tension inside the room. Poirot turned to Japp, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "We will confront Geoffrey West. But first, we must examine every angle, every detail. For this case is far from over. It is merely beginning to unfold." Japp nodded, though his face was still etched with disbelief. "What now, Poirot?" Poirot's gaze was focused, his mind already moving forward. "Now, Japp, we follow the whisper of the impossible. We find the unseen witness, and we listen closely. The truth is closer than we think, but we must be careful. For those who are hiding behind masks, they are the ones who will fall hardest when the truth is revealed." As Poirot stood, his figure cast in shadow, his mind already turning to the next step of the investigation, he knew one thing for certain. The game was afoot, and it was only a matter of time before the killer's true identity would come to light. But the final twist, the one that would shake them all to their core, was still to come. Chapter 7. Lies We Tell Ourselves. The house was still, unnervingly so, as if it too was holding its breath. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a heavy silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. Poirot stood in the middle of the room, his back straight, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to shift with a life of their own. It was as though the very walls of the estate were closing in, growing darker, heavier. But it was not the storm outside that had made Poirot uneasy. No, it was the growing tension inside, the lies that had been woven into this tangled web of deceit, and the lies he knew were about to unravel. His mind was focused, his thoughts precise. Lies, he thought to himself. They are the mask that hides the truth. But behind every mask, there is always something more, something we do not want to see. The door creaked open, and Lady Ashford entered the room, her face pale and drawn, as if the weight of her own lies had finally caught up with her. She looked at Poirot, her eyes filled with fear, guilt, and something else, something much darker. She was trembling, just slightly, but enough for Poirot to notice. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured under his breath. "How quickly the truth finds its way to the surface." "Mr. Poirot," Lady Ashford said, her voice shaking as she spoke his name, "I have something to confess. Something I have been hiding for far too long." Her words hung in the air, thick with the promise of revelation. She took a step closer, her hands clutching her dress as though it might anchor her to the floor. I was the one who found Lord Carrington's body. Not the way I told you, not the way I said I did. I found him in the garden, lying there, just like the others said. But what I didn't tell you, what I couldn't tell you, was the way I found him." She paused, her breath catching in her throat. "The person who killed him, I saw them." Poirot's gaze never left her, his expression unchanging. He had suspected this moment would come. "You saw the killer, madame?" His voice was calm, but there was a certain sharpness to it, an edge that hinted at the intensity of the moment. "And yet, you did not say a word." "I couldn't," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her confession. "I couldn't bring myself to speak. You see, the killer was someone I knew, someone I loved." She took another step forward, her eyes locked on Poirot's. "It was Geoffrey West. I saw him standing over Lord Carrington the same night he died. He didn't even see me. He didn't know I was there." Poirot's mind clicked into place, his gaze never leaving Lady Ashford's. "Ah, Geoffrey West," he mused quietly, almost to himself. "A man who had much to lose, a man with secrets of his own. But why? Why would he kill Lord Carrington?" Lady Ashford's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly, as though ashamed to let them fall. "It was over money, Mr. Poirot. Business dealings, things that Carrington had discovered. Geoffrey was desperate, and I was too blinded by my own feelings to see the danger. He tried to protect me, to protect us, but he couldn't. Carrington knew too much. He was going to ruin everything." Her voice trembled with the weight of her confession, her hands wringing the fabric of her dress as though it could absolve her of her guilt. Poirot took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "And so, you did nothing? You allowed your husband to risk everything, to lie, and then what? You remained silent in the face of a murder." She flinched, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that said more than words ever could. "I didn't know what to do," she said quietly, almost pleading. "I loved Geoffrey, and I loved my husband. I didn't want to destroy everything. I told myself I didn't know. I told myself that I hadn't seen anything." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I lied to myself." Poirot studied her with the kind of intensity that could burn through stone. "Ah, but that is the nature of human weakness, madame. We lie to ourselves to avoid the truth, to protect ourselves from the consequences. But in the end, the truth always finds a way to speak." Lady Ashford swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "Geoffrey didn't mean to kill him," she said, quickly. "He didn't mean for it to happen. It was an accident. He just lost control. But now, Mr. Poirot, now that I've told you, what should I do? What will happen to Geoffrey?" Poirot turned away, his mind working at a fever pitch. He had heard the confession, yes. He had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. But there was still something that did not sit right with him. The pieces were fitting, yes, but not perfectly. There was something amiss, something the lady was still not telling him. "Ah, madame," Poirot said softly, "there is more to this story, is there not? You are hiding something, are you not? The truth is never as simple as it appears. It is always buried beneath layers of lies, of fear, and you, madame, are no exception." Her face drained of color. She took a step back, her mouth opening and closing, as if searching for the words that had abandoned her. "What do you mean?" Poirot's voice was calm, measured. "I mean, madame, that the truth is seldom straightforward. You say Geoffrey West killed Lord Carrington, but what if that is not the entire story? What if the story you have told me is a half-truth, a lie of omission?" Lady Ashford's hands gripped the chair behind her as she stumbled back. "No," she whispered, almost pleading. "I told you everything. What else could there be?" Poirot's sharp gaze softened, but only for a moment. "I am afraid, madame, that the truth is darker than you think. You see, The killer, the one who stood over Lord Carrington, was not Geoffrey West. Lady Ashford blinked, her expression one of confusion and disbelief. What? What do you mean? Poirot's voice dropped, his words calculated and deliberate. You see, Madame Ashford, while you were focused on Geoffrey West, while you lied to yourself, you missed the most obvious of clues. He paused, his lips curling into a slight smile. The real killer, Madame, is someone you never suspected. Someone who has been playing you all along. Japp's eyes widened. Poirot, what are you saying? Poirot turned slowly, his gaze piercing Lady Ashford. I am saying, mon ami, that the killer is much closer than we think. The killer is someone who has been hiding in plain sight. Someone who has been playing the game, manipulating you and everyone else around them. The truth is, Madame Ashford, you were never the victim of Geoffrey West's actions. No, you were merely the pawn in a far larger scheme. Lady Ashford recoiled, her face paling. You don't mean... Poirot's gaze was unwavering. Indeed, the true killer, Madame Ashford, is none other than your beloved husband. Lord Carrington's death was not an accident, and it was not caused by Geoffrey West. It was orchestrated by someone who stood to gain everything by silencing Carrington for good, and that person is the one you have been protecting all along. The room seemed to close in around them, the truth hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Lady Ashford's expression shifted from confusion to realization, then to horror. Poirot turned to Japp, his voice cold but calm. And now, Inspector, the final piece of the puzzle is in place. The game had been played. The lies were exposed. And now, Poirot had uncovered the killer. As Lady Ashford stood frozen, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes, Poirot's voice rang through the room with chilling finality. The lies we tell ourselves are the most dangerous, Japp. And sometimes it is the lies we believe that will bring the greatest destruction. And with that, Poirot turned away, leaving the truth to settle heavily in the room, where it would stay forever. Chapter 8. The Fatal Mistake No One Saw. The room was suffocatingly still, the air thick with tension, as Poirot stood by the window, his sharp gaze focused on the darkening landscape. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, as though the elements themselves were desperate to share a secret. But within the room, there was silence, a silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath Poirot's feet. It was the silence of a mystery unsolved, a web that had been carefully spun, but remained tangled in the dark corners of the truth. Then suddenly, a soft noise, a shuffle of footsteps, pulled Poirot's attention from his thoughts. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. Lady Ashford stood at the door, her expression a mix of confusion and dread. She had come to speak, but her presence only deepened the mystery that had been gnawing at Poirot for days. You wanted to see me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as though even speaking too loudly might reveal too much. Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was razor-sharp, dissecting every word, every movement. "Indeed, madame, it is not your presence that troubles me, but your absence. Your absence of truth, your absence of honesty. And that, mon ami, is what I wish to address." Lady Ashford stepped into the room, her movements stiff, as though she had been carrying a burden too heavy to bear. "What do you mean?" she asked, her eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and defensiveness. Poirot motioned to the chair across from him. "Please, madame, sit. You will find that your thoughts are far less heavy when you share them. I, of course, do not judge, but I must confess there is a matter that weighs heavily on my mind. The woman hesitated before sitting, her fingers nervously clutching the edge of the chair. Poirot observed every detail, the way she avoided his gaze, the slight trembling of her hands, the tightening of her jaw. "Tell me, Madame Ashford," Poirot continued, his voice calm, yet purposeful. "Why was the gun missing from Lord Carrington's study? I have been thinking about it. The gun that should have been there, but was not. A small mistake, one that no one noticed. And yet it is the one mistake that has kept me up at night." Lady Ashford's eyes widened, and her hands clenched into fists in her lap. I don't know what you mean," she stammered. "There was no gun. There was nothing missing from the study. You're mistaken." Poirot's gaze never wavered. "Ah, but that is the beauty of it, madame. A mistake so small, so subtle, that no one sees it. Yet it is that very mistake that reveals the truth. The gun, it was not just missing, it was removed, but not by an outsider. No, the one who removed it was someone who had access, someone who believed that no one would notice." Lady Ashford opened her mouth to protest, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. "You see, madame, the smallest details are often the most telling. The absence of the gun, the way it was removed. These are the things that matter. They are not insignificant. They are the key." For a moment, there was silence. Poirot's mind worked in overdrive, piecing together the puzzle with each passing second. He could feel it. He was close, closer than ever before. The mistake, the one no one had seen, was the crack in the facade. And from that crack, the truth would flood in. "And now," Poirot continued, his voice colder, sharper, "there is one final question, one that must be answered. Why did you lie to me, Madame Ashford? Why did you not tell me the truth from the beginning?" Lady Ashford flinched, her lips trembling. I didn't lie," she whispered. "I only wanted to protect him." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and his lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "Ah, but you did lie, madame, and your lie has brought us to this moment. The moment where the smallest mistake, the smallest detail, is about to reveal everything." Lady Ashford's breath caught in her throat. She shook her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. No, you're wrong. You can't be—" "I am not wrong, madame," Poirot said, his voice calm but firm. "You see, the mistake you made was not just hiding the truth. The mistake you made was believing that no one would notice the lie. But the truth always finds a way to surface. And now it is time to face it." Lady Ashford stood abruptly, her face pale, her hands trembling. "I don't know what you're talking about. Poirot rose from his chair, his posture perfectly straight, his eyes filled with cold certainty. "No, madame. You know exactly what I am talking about. The fatal mistake. No one saw it at the time, but we see it now. The mistake that you and others have made in this game of lies. The truth that has been hidden is finally being revealed, and it is time to confront it." Lady Ashford's breath quickened, her panic rising. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice shaking. Poirot stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "What I am going to do, madame, is simple. I am going to uncover the one thing that no one saw, the truth. And when the truth is revealed, when it is laid bare, you will see just how fatal your mistake truly was." He turned to Jap, who had been standing silently by the door, watching the exchange with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. "Inspector, I believe it is time to speak with Geoffrey West." Japp raised an eyebrow. "Geoffrey West? You think he's the one?" Poirot gave a small, inscrutable smile. "Ah, Japp, it is always the ones closest to us that make the most fatal mistakes. Geoffrey West has been hiding in plain sight, his actions a series of small errors that have led us to this moment. But now we will confront him, and we will uncover the truth." Lady Ashford stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. You can't do that. You don't understand." Poirot turned, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "I understand perfectly, madame. I understand that you were trying to protect someone, but the price of protecting someone with a lie is far greater than the price of revealing the truth." With those final words, Poirot turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps measured and precise. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. The lies had been exposed, the fatal mistake had been revealed, and now the truth would come to light. As the door closed behind him, the room fell silent once more, save for the soft sound of footsteps fading into the distance. The game was not over yet, but the final reveal was close, and Poirot, ever the master, would not rest until the truth had been uncovered. Chapter 9. A family torn by suspicion. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound in the room apart from the occasional rustle of papers on the table. Poirot sat across from the family, his sharp eyes scanning each one in turn, watching for the subtle signs, the little movements that betrayed them. The tension was palpable, thickening the air as if the very walls were closing in around them. The family was gathered, each one in their own corner of the room, like actors in a tragedy, whose script had already been written. Lady Ashford, her face pale, her hands tightly gripping the edge of her chair, her eyes darting from one person to the next, as though each could be the one who would break her fragile world. Geoffrey West, standing near the window, his back turned to Poirot, but his posture stiff with an anxiety he couldn't hide. And Dr. Hargrove, sitting quietly in the corner, his fingers nervously tapping the armrest, his eyes narrowed in suspicion, yet betraying an unsettling calm. The storm had passed, but the tension in the room had only grown. The family, once united, had begun to fracture, torn by the web of lies and secrets that Poirot had slowly unraveled. The murder of Lord Carrington had thrown them into chaos, and now each one of them was a suspect, each one hiding something that could shatter everything. Poirot's gaze lingered on Geoffrey West, who, despite his stiff posture, could not hide the flicker of guilt that crossed his features every time their eyes met. The young man was clever, but not clever enough to disguise the truth. He had been too close to Carrington, too involved in the affairs of the household, and Poirot could see the unease in his eyes. But there was something else, something deeper. Geoffrey had a secret, one that was slowly unraveling before them all. Poirot's voice broke the silence, smooth and measured. "You all sit here, with your stories, your half-truths. You think I do not see the lies, the fear in your eyes? Ah, but human nature, it is so simple, so predictable. Each of you believes you are clever, that you are hiding something, but in truth, it is the very things you believe to be hidden that reveal everything." Geoffrey shifted uncomfortably, his hand running through his hair. "I don't know what you mean, Poirot. We've told you everything we know. We're all in shock. We've lost a friend, a colleague. I had no reason to harm him." Poirot tilted, his head, his eyes narrowing with a calculating precision. "Ah, but it is the ones who appear to have no reason, those who claim to be innocent, who often have the most to hide. Tell me, Monsieur West, what was it that Lord Carrington knew about your dealings? What was it that he threatened to expose? Because we both know, Monsieur, that Lord Carrington was not the sort of man to threaten without cause. Geoffrey's eyes flickered, a momentary lapse in his composure. But it was enough. I don't know what you're talking about, Geoffrey muttered, his voice faltering. He was just being difficult, making threats that he had no right to make. He didn't know anything important. Ah, but that is the problem, Monsieur, Poirot replied smoothly, his voice almost a whisper. Lord Carrington knew enough to be dangerous. He had uncovered something about you, something that threatened to ruin you, and you, Monsieur, did not want that truth to come out. So, you did what anyone in your position would do. You removed the threat. The room was silent for a moment. Geoffrey's face was ashen, his mouth working as though he wanted to speak, but no words came out. Poirot's gaze shifted to Lady Ashford, who had been listening intently, her eyes wide, with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Madame, Poirot said softly, you are so certain of Geoffrey's innocence. But tell me, what do you know of the secrets he kept from you? What do you know of his dealings with your late husband? I believe you have been living in a world of lies, Madame, but perhaps it is time to face the truth. What was it that your husband discovered? What did Geoffrey have to lose? Lady Ashford recoiled as though struck, her hands clasping her lap tightly, her knuckles white. I don't know what you mean, she whispered, her voice trembling. I trusted Geoffrey. He was a friend. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he watched her closely. Ah, but it is always the ones we trust, the most who hurt us, Madame. It is the ones who have the most to gain who will betray us in the end. She stood suddenly, the chair scraping against the floor as she pushed it back with force. I didn't know, she cried out, her voice breaking. I didn't know about Geoffrey and Carrington. I didn't know about the things he was doing, the things he was hiding. I trusted him. But you are wrong, Poirot. Geoffrey didn't kill my husband. Did he? Poirot's voice was cold, but there was an unmistakable edge of pity in it. Did Geoffrey kill Lord Carrington? Or was it someone else? The room fell into another heavy silence, broken only by the sound of the grandfather clock ticking steadily in the corner, as if it too were counting down to something inevitable. Dr. Hargrove had remained silent, his expression unreadable, but Poirot could feel his presence, like an unseen hand that held the room in place. Poirot's gaze turned to him, piercing, assessing. Dr. Hargrove, you have been very quiet, too quiet. What do you know of these dealings between Geoffrey West and Lord Carrington? What do you know of the threats that were made? Dr. Hargrove's face remained still, but Poirot caught the flicker of something in his eyes, a flash of unease, an emotion quickly masked. I don't know anything about what Geoffrey may or may not have done, he said, his voice steady, but with an underlying tension. I was only here to help, to provide care. My role was never involved in the business of the Ashford family. Poirot smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ah, but you see, Dr. Hargrove, that is where you are mistaken. Everyone has a role to play in a tragedy, even if they are not aware of it. You see, Geoffrey may have had the motive, but you, Doctor, you may hold the key. You have been in the background, observing, watching as events unfolded, and yet you were never far from the truth. Dr. Hargrove stiffened, his eyes darting to the door as though considering an escape. But it was too late. Poirot had already cornered him, the net slowly closing. Tell me, Doctor, Hargrove, Poirot continued, his voice now tinged with cold resolve. Why did you attend to Lord Carrington's injuries the night he was found dead? Why did you offer your assistance to a man who by all rights should have been beyond help by the time you arrived? The doctor's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Poirot saw a flash of panic in his eyes. I don't know what you're implying, Dr. Hargrove muttered, his voice growing thinner with each word. I was simply doing my job. Poirot leaned in, his eyes fixed on Dr. Hargrove's face. Your job? Or were you hiding something? Perhaps something you've been trying to protect? The doctor, who knew just enough to save someone who didn't deserve saving. The room was quiet. The storm outside had long since faded, leaving behind an eerie calm. But inside, the tension was suffocating, and Poirot could feel the truth inching closer, like the tightening of a noose around the neck of the guilty. Lady Ashford's face was pale, her eyes darting between Geoffrey, Dr. Hargrove, and Poirot. Tell me the truth, Poirot, she begged, her voice breaking. Who killed my husband? Poirot's gaze flickered to each of them, and then finally he spoke. It was the man who thought he could deceive everyone, the man who believed that no one would notice the smallest of mistakes. He paused, his voice growing colder. It was Dr. Hargrove. He killed Lord Carrington. He is the one who stood to gain the most from his death. His silence had a price. And now, the price has been paid. The room was still. The family was torn, their suspicions laid bare. The final truth had come to light. Poirot stood, his hands folded neatly before him. The lies we tell ourselves, Madame Ashford, are the ones that destroy us. And in this case, they have destroyed more than just a family. They have destroyed a life taken by a fatal mistake that no one saw, not until now. And with that, the case was closed. The truth had been revealed. But the consequences, Poirot knew, would linger long after the investigation had ended. As he turned to leave, his voice soft but final, he added, Remember, Jap, there is always a fatal mistake, one that no one sees until it is too late. Chapter 10. The Return of the Uninvited. The wind screamed through the narrow corridors of the old manor, rattling the windows as though the house itself was groaning under the weight of the secrets it had kept hidden for so long. Poirot stood in the center of the grand hallway, his back straight, his hands clasped behind him. The faint flicker of candlelight cast long shadows across the polished marble floors, making the room seem alive with whispers. Yet it was the silence, the heavy, suffocating silence, that filled Poirot's senses. The door at the far end of the hallway opened suddenly, and a figure stepped inside. A figure that had not been invited, a figure that had not been expected. The unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate, as if the person crossing the threshold were a shadow seeking its place in the world of the living. Poirot's sharp eyes darted to the door, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling as he took in the new arrival. His gaze hardened, his mind already working. This was no coincidence. This person was here for a reason. Ah, the uninvited, Poirot murmured to himself, his voice low but filled with cold recognition. I had wondered when you would return. The figure that entered was tall, cloaked in a dark coat that barely brushed the floor. Their face was hidden beneath the brim of a hat, casting it in shadow, but Poirot could see enough. The tightness of their posture, the deliberate way they carried themselves. It was a familiar manner, one that was not easily forgotten, a manner that had not been seen in this house for far too long. The door closed behind them, with a soft thud, but the sound seemed deafening in the stillness. Poirot took a step forward, his eyes never leaving the figure. "I believe you owe me an explanation, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "And I do not think I will be satisfied with any more lies." Figure hesitated for a moment, then slowly pulled off the hat, revealing a face that was both familiar and foreign. Geoffrey West. But it was not the same Geoffrey West who had walked into this house days ago. No, this man's eyes were haunted, his expression tight with fear, and something else, something darker, that Poirot had seen in his own reflection at times. Guilt. "Poirot," Geoffrey said, his voice taut, strained. I had no choice. I had to come back." Poirot's lips twitched. "Ah, of course. You had no choice. A convenient excuse, as always. But I do not think I need to hear it from you. I already know why you are here, Monsieur West. The question is not why you returned, but rather what you are hiding." Geoffrey's eyes darted around the room nervously, but Poirot could see the shift in him. The unease, the tension that had seeped into his every move. Geoffrey was not in control. Geoffrey was afraid, and that Poirot knew was precisely what made him dangerous. "I had no other choice, Poirot," Geoffrey said again, his voice cracking. "You were getting too close. You were going to uncover everything." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his sharp gaze cutting through Geoffrey like a knife. "Ah, so it was you, after all, the one who believed you could fool me with your lies. But let us not be coy, monsieur. You were already caught in the web you created. The question is, how far will you go to protect the secret that has brought you back into this house?" Geoffrey's hand clenched at his side, but he didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward the stairs, as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. "You do not need to wait for others to arrive, Geoffrey," Poirot said, his voice calm, but with an edge of finality. "The only person you need to answer to is yourself. You are no longer the man who can hide behind others. You are the one who has caused all this chaos, this death." Geoffrey's face went pale, his lips trembling as he took a step back. "You don't understand. You can't possibly understand what I've had to do, the things I've had to sacrifice. My life, it was all built on lies. All of it, Poirot." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, monsieur, you believed that you could keep these lies hidden forever. But you see, in the end, it is not the lies that matter. It is the truth that always comes to light." The sound of footsteps echoed again from the staircase, and Poirot turned his gaze toward them. The others were arriving. Lady Ashford, Dr. Hargrove. But there was another, a shadow that seemed to follow them, a new presence that none of them had expected. The door opened once more, and in walked a woman, her face pale, her eyes filled with uncertainty. It was Lady Ashford, but something about her seemed different. Her gaze flickered nervously between Geoffrey and Poirot could see the tremble in her hands as she held them tightly together. You have come back," Lady Ashford said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Madame, you must understand. The game is nearly over. The lies, the deception, they have no more place here. It is time to face the truth, no matter how painful." Geoffrey's face twisted, a mix of anger and fear playing across his features. "You don't understand, Poirot," he snapped, his voice growing more frantic. "You think you've uncovered everything, but you haven't. There's more to this than you know. You don't know what I've done." Poirot stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "Ah, but I know far more than you think, monsieur. The truth is always there, hiding in plain sight, and it is only a matter of time before the smallest mistake." Poirot paused, his eyes flicking to the corner of the room, where something caught his attention, a glimmer of something familiar, something out of place. He stepped forward, his eyes scanning the shadows, his sharp mind working quickly. A faint noise, a soft creak of the floorboards. Something or someone was lurking just beyond the reach of the light. A presence, an uninvited guest. And then from the corner, a figure stepped into view. It was Dr. Hargrove. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, something cold and calculating, that made Poirot's blood run cold. "I'm afraid, Poirot, you've been chasing shadows," Dr. Hargrove said, his voice low, measured. "You've been looking for a killer, but you've missed the one right in front of you." Poirot's heart skipped a beat. The final piece. The man who had been hiding in plain sight, the one who had manipulated them all, was standing before them. You have been behind all of this," Poirot said slowly, his voice steady, but his mind racing to make sense of the twist in this tale. "You are the one who orchestrated everything. The murders, the lies, the betrayal." Dr. Hargrove smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I didn't have much of a choice, Poirot. You see, it's always the same. You tell yourself that you're doing it for a good reason, that you're protecting those you love. But in the end, the lies catch up with you. And then, well, then you have to do whatever it takes to survive." Lady Ashford gasped, taking a step back as she realized the depth of the betrayal. You were working with Geoffrey," she whispered, her voice a mix of shock and disbelief. Poirot's mind spun as the pieces clicked into place. Dr. Hargrove had been the unseen hand, pulling the strings from the shadows, manipulating everyone. But why? What was his ultimate goal? What had he hoped to gain? "I did what I had to do, Doctor," Hargrove said coldly, his eyes locking onto Poirot. "You understand that, don't you, Poirot? After all, we all lie to ourselves, don't we? We all convince ourselves that we're doing the right thing until it's too late." Poirot stepped forward, his voice sharp and final. "But that, my friend, is the fatal mistake, the one no one sees, the one that always leads to destruction." The room fell silent, the weight of the truth settling over them all like a shroud. Poirot had uncovered the truth, and in doing so had revealed the killer, the mastermind, the uninvited guest who had been hiding in plain sight. The game was over. The truth had been revealed, and there was no escaping it. And as Poirot turned to face them all, his voice cutting through the stillness, he left them with one final thought. The lies we tell ourselves, they are the ones that destroy us. And in the end, it is always the truth that prevails. Chatham, Chapter 11. The final twist of the knife. The house was silent again, as if it too was holding its breath. Outside, the storm had passed, but the air inside was thick with the weight of something heavier. Poirot stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the darkened sky. The storm had cleansed the earth of its impurities, but here, in this house, the air was still tainted by the lies, by the murder, by the shadows of deceit that clung to every corner. And then there was the quiet knock on the door, soft, deliberate, as though the person on the other side already knew what they would find. Poirot turned slowly, his sharp eyes narrowing. He had known this moment was coming, The final twist, the one that would reveal everything in one swift stroke. The door creaked open, and Lady Ashford entered, her face pale, her movements slow, almost as if she were dragging herself through a nightmare. She looked at Poirot, her eyes wide with fear, and something else, something darker. "You've found it, haven't you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "The truth, the final piece." Poirot didn't respond immediately. He simply observed her, his gaze cutting through her with precision, his mind piecing together the final fragments. He already knew the truth, but he let the silence hang in the air for just a moment longer, allowing the tension to build, as though the truth itself were a knife hovering over the edge of the table, waiting to plunge into the heart of the matter. "Ah, madame," Poirot said finally, his voice calm and measured. "The truth, it is always revealed, but it is never quite as simple as we imagine. We all tell ourselves lies to protect what we believe is important, but in the end, it is the lies that destroy us." Lady Ashford's breath caught in her throat. "I didn't want to believe it," she said quietly. "I wanted to believe that Geoffrey was innocent, that he didn't kill my husband. But now I know he did." Poirot's eyes flickered to the corner of the room, where Geoffrey West stood, his face pale and his hands clenched tightly at his sides. "You see, Monsieur West," Poirot said, turning his gaze back to the man, "you may have thought that you could hide your guilt. But a man like you, whose motives are driven by greed and desperation, cannot hide forever. It is only a matter of time before the truth finds its way to the surface." Geoffrey opened his mouth, but no words came out. His gaze darted from Lady Ashford to Poirot, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and rage. "I didn't kill him," Geoffrey finally managed to say, his voice shaking. "I swear it. I didn't—" Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "No, no, monsieur. You did not kill him, not directly, but you were the cause of his death. Your actions, your decisions, led to Lord Carrington's death. You were the spark that lit the flame." Lady Ashford's face twisted in anguish, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the chair. "No, I don't understand. If Geoffrey didn't kill him, then who did?" Poirot's gaze turned cold. "Ah, but that is the final twist, madame. The one you did not see coming. The one that you have been running from all along." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "The killer, madame, is closer than you think. It is not Geoffrey. It is not even the person you have believed to be the murderer. No, the killer is the one who has been hiding in plain sight, the one who has manipulated everyone around them, the one who has played the game, carefully, calculatingly, from the shadows." Lady Ashford's breath hitched as she turned toward Geoffrey, her eyes filled with disbelief. You didn't kill him." Geoffrey stepped back, his expression one of confusion. "No, I didn't. I don't know what's going on. I didn't kill anyone." Poirot turned to face Dr. Hargrove, who had been standing silently in the corner, his expression unreadable. "And you, Doctor?" "Hargrove," Poirot said, his voice cold, his eyes piercing. "You knew all along, didn't you? You knew that the death of Lord Carrington was not an accident. You knew that the man who had been closest to him, the man who had the most to gain, was you." Dr. Hargrove flinched, his face paling, his eyes darting to the door. "No," he said quickly, his voice growing frantic. "You're wrong, Poirot. I had nothing to do with it. I was just trying to help. I never meant for any of this to happen." Poirot's eyes locked onto Dr. Hargrove's with an intensity that seemed to stop time itself. Ah, but you did, mon ami. You were the one who put the knife in Lord Carrington's back. Figuratively and literally, you were the one who saw an opportunity and took it, who manipulated everyone around you to cover up your own mistake. Dr. Hargrove's eyes widened in shock. What? What are you talking about? Poirot stepped closer to him, his voice dropping to a whisper, though it was as sharp as any weapon. The final twist, Doctor. Hargrove, the one no one saw coming. You thought you had covered your tracks, but there was one thing you didn't consider: the way the knife was used. You see, Doctor, Hargrove, it was your own hand that pushed the knife into Carrington. You were the one who planted the seeds of doubt, the one who manipulated Lady Ashford, the one who thought you could hide behind others and let them take the fall. Doctor. Hargrove stumbled back, his hand clutching his chest, as if the truth itself had struck him like a physical blow. No, Poirot. It wasn't me. I didn't. Poirot turned to Lady Ashford, who was standing frozen, her face pale, her eyes filled with confusion. Madame Ashford, I know this is difficult to understand, but the truth, it must be faced. The killer, the one who orchestrated your husband's death, is Dr. Hargrove. The good doctor, the man who cared for him, the man who pretended to be the hero, was the true villain all along. Lady Ashford's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling, as she looked from Geoffrey to Dr. Hargrove. But why? Why would he do it? Why would he kill my husband? Poirot's eyes softened, though there was no pity in them. Ah, madame, the reasons are always so simple when we look closely enough. Dr. Hargrove believed he could erase his past, that he could hide behind his medical profession and the trust of others. But what he did not count on was that the truth would always find a way to rise to the surface. And in the end, he became the one who betrayed those he claimed to protect. The room was silent, the weight of the truth sinking in. Poirot turned away from them all, his eyes momentarily drifting to the window, where the storm had long since faded. The clouds had parted, and the first rays of dawn were beginning to break through. The truth, Poirot knew, was like the dawn, painful but necessary. The lies we tell ourselves, they are the most dangerous of all, Poirot murmured, almost to himself. They are the lies we live by, the ones we cling to when we believe the truth is too difficult to face. But in the end, the truth will always win. It is inevitable. Lady Ashford's sobs filled the room, the weight of her grief crashing down upon her. Geoffrey stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. And Dr. Hargrove, the once confident physician, stood in the center of it, all his world crumbling as the truth was exposed. Poirot paused for a moment, turning back to face them one last time. You see, madame, the truth is always like this. We think we can hide from it, but it is relentless. It will find us, no matter where we run. And with that, Poirot left them, leaving behind the shattered pieces of a family torn apart by lies, and a man who had finally been unmasked for the villain he truly was. The final twist had come, and the knife had been turned. Chapter 12. Who really died that night? The house was deathly quiet, the shadows in the corners of the room stretching long and lean, as though the very walls had witnessed the horror unfolding within them. Poirot stood by the window, looking out into the storm-lashed night. The wind had subsided, but the air still carried an uneasy tension, a silence that pressed on his chest, like the weight of a secret too heavy to bear. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one sharper than the last. There was something deeply unsettling about this case, something that gnawed at him with a persistence he could not ignore. And then the door opened. Lady Ashford entered the room, her face drawn, her eyes red from the long hours of sleeplessness and grief. She walked in slowly, almost as though she were afraid to cross the threshold, as if her very presence here would make the truth more unbearable. Poirot watched her closely, noting the tremor in her hands, the way her clothes clung to her thin frame, the way her gaze flickered nervously between him and the empty chair across from his desk. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "I have come to beg of you. Please, end this nightmare." Poirot's gaze never wavered as he looked at her, his sharp eyes piercing through the layers of fear and uncertainty that clouded her features. "Ah, madame, the nightmare, it is far from over. It is only beginning, you see. The truth, it has a way of catching up with us, no matter how fast we run from it." She flinched at his words, but Poirot did not soften his gaze. "You have lied to me, madame, not just by omission, but in your own mind. You have deceived yourself for so long, but the truth cannot be hidden forever." Her hands shook as she clasped them in front of her, her eyes welling with tears. I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I never wanted any of this. I loved him. I loved Geoffrey. But now I see the truth, and it's more horrible than I could have ever imagined." Poirot stood, his hands folded behind his back, his posture regal and composed. As always, he could see the guilt in her eyes, but also the desperation, the fear that was starting to consume her. "Ah, but madame, it is not just Geoffrey whom you have deceived. It is not just Geoffrey whose actions have led to death. No, no. It is you, Madame Ashford, who played the greatest role in this tragedy." Lady Ashford recoiled, her face paling. "Me?" she gasped. "What do you mean? What have I done?" Poirot walked toward her, his steps measured, deliberate. "The fatal mistake, madame, is not that you lied. The fatal mistake is that you believed your lies. You allowed yourself to live in a world of your own creation, where you could not see the consequences of your actions. You thought yourself above reproach. But now, the truth has caught up with you, and it will tear you apart, just as it has torn apart the family you so desperately tried to protect." Lady Ashford's face twisted in anguish, her eyes searching for some kind of escape. "I didn't kill him. I didn't kill Geoffrey. I didn't—" Poirot held up a hand to silence her. "Ah, but you were complicit, madame. You knew the truth, and you chose to bury it. But what you failed to understand is that the truth always rises, and when it does, it exposes us for what we are." Lady Ashford sank into the chair, her hands pressed to her face, as though trying to block out the revelation. But Poirot could see the truth in her eyes now, clearer than ever. She had known all along. She had lied to herself, believing that her actions would go unnoticed, believing that the consequences of her deceit would never catch up with her. But now, there was no escaping the truth. Poirot turned away from her, his mind racing. The pieces had all come together, but there was still something nagging at him, something just beyond his reach. He needed to confront the others. Geoffrey West, the one who had been so desperate to hide the truth. Dr. Hargrove, the quiet observer who had played his part in the drama without anyone noticing. All of them had something to hide, but only one of them had truly killed. The door opened again, and in walked Geoffrey West. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but there was a coldness to him now, a certain distance that Poirot had not seen before. Geoffrey did not speak immediately, but his eyes flicked nervously to Lady Ashford, who was still seated in the chair, her face buried in her hands. "I've been expecting you, Monsieur West," Poirot said, his voice calm but firm. "I think it is time for us to have a conversation." Geoffrey hesitated for a moment, but then he stepped forward, his voice quiet and tense. "What do you want from me, Poirot? What else do you need to hear? It was an accident, I swear it. I didn't mean for it to happen." Poirot turned his gaze on Geoffrey, his sharp eyes never wavering. "Ah, Monsieur West, the lies we tell ourselves again. You didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. And now, the truth is plain for all to see. The one you thought you had buried, the one you thought no one would find, has come to light." Geoffrey's eyes widened, and for the first time, Poirot saw a flicker of real fear in his expression. You don't know what you're talking about," Geoffrey stammered. "I never killed him. I never meant to—" "But you did, monsieur," Poirot interrupted, his voice cutting through Geoffrey's panic. "You killed him, but not in the way you think. You killed him with your actions, with your greed, with your desire to protect your own interests, and you thought no one would notice. But I noticed, Monsieur West. I noticed everything." Geoffrey took a step back, his face drained of color. No, Poirot. Poirot's voice grew softer, but the finality of his words cut through the air like a knife. "The question is not whether you killed Lord Carrington, Monsieur West. The question is, who really died that night?" Geoffrey's lips parted, but no words came out. Lady Ashford raised her head, her eyes wide with confusion. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Poirot turned to her, his gaze steady. "Madame, you have been living a lie. You have been hiding the truth from yourself. The truth is not that Geoffrey killed your husband. The truth is that Lord Carrington's death was not an accident. It was a sacrifice. And the real victim, madame, is not Geoffrey. It is you. You who has been blind to the consequences of your own actions. You who has allowed this house of lies to crumble around you." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of Poirot's words sinking in like a stone in water. Lady Ashford's face crumpled, her hands shaking as she reached for the edge of the table to steady herself. "But I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted to protect Geoffrey, protect the family." Poirot's expression softened, but there was no sympathy in his gaze. "Ah, madame, protection can be a dangerous thing. Sometimes, when we try to protect others, we end up hurting them more than we could ever imagine." Geoffrey stood there, frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. He could not speak, his mind racing to catch up with the implications of Poirot's words. He was guilty, yes, but it was more complicated than he had ever imagined. Poirot turned to Jap, who had been standing in the corner, observing silently. "The truth, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice quiet but filled with certainty, "is always more complicated than we think. We tell ourselves lies to protect those we love, but in the end, it is the truth that always wins. And the truth, it is far more devastating than any lie." As Poirot turned to leave, he paused at the door, his final words lingering in the room like a shadow. "Who really died that night, madame? Not just your husband, but your own innocence. And now, the rest of you will pay the price for the lies you've told." And with that, Poirot walked out of the room, leaving behind a family torn apart by their own secrets. a family whose very foundation had been shattered by the truth that had finally come to light. The storm outside had passed, but the damage had already been done. The truth, after all, had its own way of killing,